And Nancy is kind of the force behind this event, so we're going to have to wait till she gets her slides uploaded. But we live just south of Lisbon, Iowa, and in a small unincorporated town called Sutliff. And we've owned property here for probably the last 25 years, but we just started to improve it probably, you know, 10 years ago or so. And so I still see we don't have any slides though.
Nancy, are you able to get those okay? You're muted.
Okay, sorry, my whole computer locked up trying to share the screen. I'm going to try again. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, still trying, sorry. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Nancy.
Okay, go back to, okay, now I think we got it. So I'm so sorry for the delay.
There it is. See it.
Okay, we're good. Okay.
If you want to presenter mode, you can.
Okay. Okay, there we go. So hi, I'm Nancy Brannaman, and my husband and I live in Northeast Johnson County in a beautiful acreage that is just south of the historic Sutliff Bridge. I grew up on a farm in north central Illinois in LaSalle County, and I am the manager, the operator, and a co-owner of the farm. It's about 336 acres, and I went to Iowa State University, earned an MS in ag economics and an undergrad in ag biz and farm operation. And I have taken the lead on establishing native prairie and pollinator plots on my farm in Illinois, and I try to help John with the native prairie establishment that we're doing here on our acreage in Iowa. John?
Yeah, this is John. And so the farm we have here in Iowa is part of it's from my family farm. We only have about 55 acres here. And when I retired, I wanted to do something. And I actually started a sawmill business and the kilning business. And if you hear a noise in the background, that's actually the kiln going. But my goal was to slab live edge tabletops. And I've been doing that for the last 5 to 6 years, and it seems to keep me busy. But on the farm here, this farm was in crops at one time, and right now it's all timber, pasture, and we've been establishing prairie on it for probably the last 5 to 6 years.
Okay, so some of the things we're going to talk about today are first, I'll go through the benefits of native prairie and pollinator plots over manicured lawns, and then we'll give you an overview of establishing the native prairie and pollinator plots here in Illinois, or in Illinois. And then John will talk about the work that we've done establishing native prairie here in Iowa. And we have some steps for success. I'll talk about financing that I've used for the farm in Illinois from USDA. John will talk about prairie maintenance, and we'll see if we think of any other lessons learned that we haven't shared already in our presentation. We have some resources, some books at the end of our presentation that we'll put up on the screen, and then will be available for questions. So, so one of the benefits of native prairie is to get out of mowing, and that's been one of the main reasons that we've been working on establishing prairie and pollinator plants here in Iowa. I wish I could go to the 4-H fair instead of mowing this huge lawn. As I drive through rural Iowa, I just see so many large lawns around farmsteads, and also large green spaces that is bluegrass and fescue, even in small towns, that I think would be wonderful places to be converted to native prairie. So we could change these manicured lawns to the beauty of prairie
Nancy,
grasses.
you're cutting out.
Okay, we could change the manicured lawns for the beauty of native prairie plants. Is that better, Vanya?
Yes.
Okay. So some other benefits are for native prairie is they provide habitat for beneficial insects and wildlife. They build soils and prevent soil erosion. They reduce weed issues in crop fields. They filter water and prevent flooding. They provide a seasonal delight, and they reduce global warming. This is actually a photo of some conservation reserve that I have established on our farm in Illinois. Fire breaks can create beautiful walking trails on your farm and around your farmstead. And it's always fun to involve children, grandchildren, 4-H'er scouts, Sunday school classes with seedings. These are my great nieces and nephews. I saved back some seed on a pollinator plot up by our farmstead in Illinois, and then saved some small containers so the children could come out and toss seeds. And they'll be able to enjoy the flowers that they've planted for years to come. So happiness is only having to mow prairie fire breaks. This is an overview of my farm in Illinois. The yellow outline are the fields of my farm. And then I have outlined in red the 3 areas that I have worked on since 2020 to establish prairie and pollinator plots. So this is conservation stewardship program funded projects on the Paddy Ridge Farm. And the yellow dot, the triangle here, is funded and seeded, and it's 0.6 of an acre, and we seeded it in 2022. The red area is a large green space that used to be orchard, and it was not funded. So I continue to have my CSP application in, and I actually just sent a note to the NRCS specialist to ask if we could review my CSP application. They also cover windbreak restoration, and there is a windbreak that is deteriorating with in the black dots in the upper left-hand side, and that was not funded yet either, and I'm hoping that will get funded soon. So we have a historic house that was built in the mid-1850s. And you can see the 0.6 pollinator plot in the foreground. I burned down the brome that was in this area. It was too tight of a corner for the big planter to get in, and so the planter had made a big sweep around a corner, and this area was just brome, and now it's pollinator. So this photo was taken, I believe, in November, so there weren't any flowers blooming at that time. Then also we have a field, a small 7-acre field that is in the shape of a triangle because of the curve in the railroad. And the point of this field was impossible with large equipment these days to get in and plant it. So we cut off the top half-acre, and I burned down the giant ragweed and also seeded that in 2022 to pollinator plot seeds, and that was funded with CSP also. And then in 2019, I was taking over the farm from the prior tenant, and I noticed we just had a cesspool of water hemp and cockleburr and other weeds in a wet spot in this field, and the tenant had actually planted on the right side of the field. So there was no way to get into this area of weeds to mow during the growing season. So I knew it was a wetland, having grown up on the farm, and I talked to NRCS and bid it into continuous CRP. It's 2.7 acres, and I asked NRCS to put the boundary right on the east side of the field so that I could easily get in and mow and burn. I bid it in the fall of 19, and I was going to frost seed in the winter, but it was actually wet and warm and impossible to get in with any kind of equipment, even small equipment, to seed. And I requested an extension because I knew that the weeds were going to be bad the following year. So I worked on burning down about 3 times in 2020, and then we hand seeded in the winter of 2020 and 2021. And then I had bid in originally 23 acres on another farm that I wanted to essentially reestablish waterways, and I wanted to establish trees on part of the field on the south side, the south end, that was very unproductive. The soils were actually timber soils, so cropping was very difficult on these soils. And I needed to sell the 80 acres to buy out my uncle who owns part of the home farm. So then I talked to the prospective buyer, a neighbor, and he said he did not want to care for trees in CRP. So I revised the bid to 13 acres of wetland restoration. And we used yield maps to help us determine the unproductive part of the field, the parts of the field. And we were able to carve out just those unproductive parts and the wetlands that really should have been waterways all along. And NRCS worked with us really well. My farm operator and I made sure that he could turn equipment around and get in like on the east side of that south wet mesic seeding area. So now I'll have John explain what we're doing on our acreage in Iowa.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, this is the aerial of our farm in Iowa, and it's years ago it was cropped, and we put it into CRP ground and actually planted hardwood trees in a lot of the CRP areas, mostly walnuts and oaks, and we actually put in some ash that we've probably taken out quite a few already. But one, like what Nancy was saying, we don't want to crop the ground and we don't want to mow. So it's been a progress of how to get there, and started actually in 2018. And in the yellow area, we did some prairie and some wildflowers in that area. And then in 2022, in the timber area, we actually seeded some wood sedge and in a stand of walnut and black cherry trees. And then in 23, we're still working on prairie and extra flowers, and then along a driveway. But then we're also trying to we've got pasture or grasses in one area, and that we're probably going to expand into more native prairie and get it back into some flowers too. So
yeah, and some of the purple areas actually have like a little blue stem and some other native prairie plants coming on as we have stopped mowing those areas.
I think that one of the things that to be successful in getting prairies established is, look at your site. We've got a lot of sandy loam soil here in Iowa, and it's not a very good crop ground. So I mean, there's a prime property for prairie and getting back to native wildflowers and such. And you can get help choosing your mix. I mean, we purchased a commercial mix, and then we actually added some additional sunflowers to it, or not sunflowers, but milkweed to it. When I was growing up, I mean, I was a killer of milkweed, and anymore now I grow it. So it's quite a 180 for me. But we do see a lot of monarchs coming through anymore, and a lot of habitat too. Done a little bit of everything. We've done some spring planting and some actually late fall pre-frost planting, and both seem to work. And I may talk a little more about more of the details, but I think the key is to get the soil, get the weeds down first and get the soil prepared. But then when we did a spring planting, I think in the fall one year, I went ahead and got the burnt down the weeds, and I actually prepared the soil, but then I planted winter wheat and took that through to spring, and then came back in and did a burn down of it and did the seeding, and that worked well. In the timber, we did a late fall seeding with the sedge. That was a little different. You kind of had to time that one right before the snow, and it seems like it's hard to predict the weather anymore, but we've actually had some really good success with the sedge. And it was scary to see because it was difficult to see, but it was also expensive. So I think, you hated to do things wrong. I did use extenders. We've done everything from, we had rice hulls one year and they worked well. We tried rice hulls, another source, and didn't work. And we've done cat litter. And that seems to work pretty well, and to get to more bulk. And then I think the key to any of this, though, is getting a good roller. Once you've seeded, is to go back and really start to roll and pack that seed in. And then the first, Nancy's moving fast on me. The first year for mowing, I think you worry about the weeds. We had a lot of foxtail come, but eventually the foxtail gets pushed out. You don't think it will, but eventually it goes away. But in here, we had a lot of mullein and mare's tail come in certain areas. And either you do some mowing that's high up, 6 inches or higher, and then just do a couple times a year. I did the first year, and then we haven't mowed for the last couple of years in some of the areas. And do some spot spraying, to take things out. And then there was a lot of evenings for a half an hour to an hour. I'd be out there doing therapy, pulling mare's tail and mullein. And with the sandy soil, it was pretty easy to do. I think other soils you might have some trouble, but you can cover quite a bit of ground, actually, and it just some pleasant evenings out there, and you can kind of get to know everything that's coming up. And after a while, you start to weed some of those things out.
Okay, just a couple of last things is it's really been fun to try to learn the species of grasses and flowers because they are so different than the grasses and cultivated flowers I grew up with. And it's fun to attend workshops and then to read about native prairie. So one of the steps for success is to really study your weeds, as John mentioned. Try to identify the perennials and the annuals, and then think about how you're going to eradicate them as much as possible before seedbed preparation. I realize that some farmers are organic and do not use conventional herbicides. One thought I had on this was depending on the rules of organic farming, which I am not familiar with, this area is going to wind up being organic in the long run. So if using herbicides to help get good weed eradication is something you would consider, it might help you in the long run, especially for some of those tough perennial weeds like Canada thistle and other thistles. And then once you prepare the seed bed, you need to think about what kind of flush of weeds might come up. And an important thing, this is a lesson that we learned, I don't think we did badly, but is be sure to match the seed to the site. The wet mesic soils need appropriate plants for wetlands and wetter soils. our soils are very dry and droughty, and they require different types of prairie plants. One prairie plant that we don't have, at least that I haven't identified yet, is buffalo grass. And that is a plant and seed that I'm going to be researching that we can use to fill in areas and establish other prairie areas on our farms. And then if you have a small area, like we have a beautiful prairie area right in front of our home, we actually have to water that in order to keep some of the bigger flowers going, because it's almost pure sand on the top of our bluff here. So take your time eradicating seed before planting. Another lesson that I learned was I rushed into planting the CSP plots. And since it was they were brome, at least the one in front of the old historic house, I didn't burn down the brome well enough. And I do have brome still in that pollinator plot. I was reading, actually preparing for this webinar, that you can work on spraying the perennial grasses like in the late fall or in the early spring before the warm season plants have broken dormancy. And for the 2.5 acre CRP plot, I mentioned that I asked NRCS for a year extension and told them it was my concerns about weeds. And they were very happy to adjust the contract and give me an additional year to work on spraying. And that's the year that I sprayed 3 times. On the CSP pollinator plots, I sprayed twice with glyphosate and 2,4-D. So weeding is ongoing in the early years. You can use a hand sprayer, a hoe, or pull weeds, as John said. I've gotten out talking to people on the phone, pulling weeds by hand. And you can supplement mowing with hand weeding, especially the perennial weeds. And as I mentioned, you can spray early in the season when the cool season grasses and some of the winter annuals are perking up, but before the warm season plants have broken dormancy. John?
So again, it's I think we're going to get into a few pictures of the equipment we've used a little later, but it's like, again, it's prepare that seed bed right off the bat. I mean, you don't get much of a chance after you seed. So and I like to seed the half rate and go back over it again, just because I'm afraid I'm going to use all the seed and I've got half the ground seeded. So so I always like to cut it in half. So I do use extenders quite a bit. And we've had success doing spring and a late fall seeding. So both have worked for us. And the extenders, I think the next slide, Nancy. Again, it can be a little bit of everything. We've had good luck with rice hulls early on, like I said, and then kitty litter, the two that we've used quite a bit. Oil dry, stall dry might work. I've used oats also. I've used wheat, but usually if you can get a good clean bag of rice hulls, that seemed to be the best for us. So again, I think the next slide is there's really no best time for seeding, depending on what you're seeding, but it's kind of what you're going to plant and when you have time to get out there. But like I said, we did do some winter wheat to get us through the winter on one patch, and it worked well. It kept the weeds down, and then was able to get in there after that, in the spring and do the seeding. So the next slide, I think, is a little drill that we purchased several years ago. It's from a company here in Iowa, but it's called the Dewdrop Drill. And it's just, you pull it either behind, we got a little Cub lowboy and a four-wheeler and an old 1947 Willys Jeep too. And you can pull it behind that depending on what you're seeding in. But like it's about 4 foot wide. It's got 2 compartments for the small seed and the larger seed. You don't need hydraulics. It's got a little battery that raises those disc blades up and down. And it's really, in my mind, not a drill, but it just drops the seed in there. And then I think it's gear driven. So you adjust it, set it how many pounds you want to, spread in an acre. And then it's been fairly accurate for me. And then, but again, the key is packing it after I think you seed it. And we've had a few other things, just pull behind seeders, ones that go on your shoulders, little battery operated ones, some hand cranked ones, whatever seems to work. But my favorite is that little dewdrop drill. If I have things to seed, that's usually the one I go for. And then that's not the sprayer of choice for me. That's Nancy's sprayer. I've got one that actually fits in the back of the Jeep with a boom, and I use that usually for the burn down. If I do the winter wheat or something, then I'll go in there and burn it down and use that. And then I also got a hand wand on it that I'll do some spot spraying with it too. And I've done, like Nancy said, we've done a lot of just pulling weeds. So
I also have a Roundup sprayer that's battery operated. It's a hand sprayer, 3 gallons. And then, of course, we've used lots of hand pump sprayers that are 1 or 2 gallons for spot spraying with a wand. So I'm going to switch now to talk a little bit about my experience with financing. John and I have not bid anything on our acreage, not bid anything into conservation reserve in recent years here on our farm. So all of the expense of seeding the native grasses and flowers has been our expense. And we found that, except for the sedge was quite an investment, and we did a lot of study. But we found that comparing that, we didn't have to spend all the time mowing and gasoline, and we feel that it's affordable to do some self-financing. But I started out by talking to NRCS about some conservation reserve, try to brush up on the conservation reserve program. I knew about this wetland, that 2.7 acres, and a lot of years it never grew anything except weeds. My goal was to try to alleviate the weed problem, especially the water hemp. And I really like native prairie and pollinator plots for the beneficial insects, and there aren't many in our area and of Illinois. So I explained my vision. They advised, Mary was the specialist I worked with, and she told me about the programs, about bidding, the deadlines, and how to score the most points to be competitive, to be selected for a USDA program. Mary came out and did a site analysis, and then of course did the soil analysis. And CRP requires the land has to have been cropped. It has to have base acres. And CSP does not, at least when I bid, I'll learn about any updates to the rules, but it's nice because CSP was available for areas around the farmstead that were not crop base acres. And CRP does require a reduction in base acres because you're taking it out of production, but I get a nice annual payment, and I also get CSP payments, especially cost share for establishing the pollinator plots. And of course, CRP had a 50% cost share with it too. CSP has a very large menu of conservation practices that I could choose from, and I could determine which practices to implement at the start of the 5-year contract and which to implement at later years. It was easy for me to get CRP funding by bidding in for wetlands restoration, pollinator plots, and planting trees, since they have higher point values. Other CRP practices have lower point values. I can't address those in great detail, but these are good things to ask your NRCS specialist. I found it very difficult to get CSP funding, as I found it almost impossible to get EQIP funding for other conservation practices on my farm. My CSP application rolls over for consideration in subsequent years, so I don't have to keep rebidding. My application is in there. And as I mentioned, I'm going to review the plan and see if we can do some updating. I think it also is beneficial to talk to the Soil Conservation District specialist to learn about state conservation funds. And NRCS has a list of contractors who can help you with seeding. I had Pheasants Forever seed the 13-acre CRP area. My farm operator did not have a no-till drill, and he didn't have a large 3-point hitch seeder. So I needed to find somebody, and Pheasants Forever does CRP and prairie seedings for people for a very nominal fee, I think $10 an acre. And they did a nice job. It established really well. We are right next to the Johnson County Conservation Office here in Northeast Johnson County, and we've talked to them to get on their list to help some of their employees do burning as contractors evenings and weekends. And we're on their list to help us burn some of our area here in Iowa. My CRP contract in Illinois requires burning in year 5. I'm going into year 4, so I need to be in touch with NRCS. Sometimes these contractors get very busy, and we've learned we need to get in touch even a year to 2 years out to get on the list to get some help with burning. Then USDA has a lot of good resources on their website. There's some short fact sheets, and then there were some more detailed fact sheets about how they wanted prairie areas and pollinator areas established on land that they have contracted. Nope. My PowerPoint is not moving, so while I am trying to get the PowerPoint to move, John can talk a little bit about mowing.
So the first year is probably the biggest year for mowing your native prairie. And I think we mowed, I don't think we mowed every 3 to 4 weeks, but at least maybe 3 times, 2 to 3 times that first year, but just kept raising the height of the mower. And then we haven't mowed for the last couple of years in a lot of the areas. And it's interesting, you know, when you're looking for the diversity of seed in a prairie mix, I think that's one of the keys, because we've got, depending on the slope and how the ground is and how it's shaded, not shaded, you'll get different plants to come. And we've got some, I mean, one area we just got hoary vervain just pop. I mean, it just took over a whole, like an acre. And we've actually harvested it and sent it to a seed company and had them clean it and sell it. And then other places it won't come up. You know, just over the ridge of where this acre is, there's hardly any. But then you get other things. You get the blue stems. You'll get other things coming in. So it's just, I think if you can add a mix with a lot of diversity and then just mow things down. And like I said, the foxtail scared us the first year, but eventually it kind of went away. But we still get a lot of pressure, I think, yet from mare's tail and especially mowing. And some of, you know, in some of the timbers, we've got, you know, garlic running in there. And so it's just kind of where you are. I think when we went in and did the sedge, we've got a pretty good stand of sedge already. And that's only been in a little over a season. And it really, that was probably the most pressure I had in seeding because it was such a different kind of seed and a very low rate. And it was in areas that you can't get equipment in very well. So I was, you know, to pack it and roll it, you know, it was quite the dance, you know, to get in there with the tractor and the roller, but it seemed to work pretty well. But I think now there's very little mowing that we're doing, and we just kept raising the height, and now it's more just spot areas. And then we haven't burned. We burned one area once, just Nancy and I, and got a little scared, and now we're looking for help. But we're on a list, and I think that's going to help even a lot of the sedge in the timber too, once we get it burned out.
Okay, we've shared a lot of lessons learned, and perhaps some of these lessons might come out in the questions. So we're getting close to the end of our time. So I'll just share the last slide that we have. These are some resources. The book, Practical Guide to Prairie Reconstruction by Carl Kurtz, is small, and I checked a lot of his information as I was preparing this presentation, and we have used it to educate ourselves. The Ecology and Management of Prairies in the Central United States by Chris Helzer. And you might check SARE for publications. I've mentioned NRCS website. Check and talk to the Soil and Water Conservation District. A really wonderful book is, especially for restoring prairie in timber areas such as oak savannas, is the book Timber Hill by Sibylla Brown. Dr. Brown, her husband, was a retired dentist. They bought land in south central Iowa and discovered that their land was, a lot of it was overgrown oak savanna, and they learned a lot, especially about burning, and they used burning extensively to reestablish the oak savannas on their property. And Sibylla also chronicles the plants that come back, and then the insects and the fungi and the flowers that came back as they were restoring the land on their farm. Another book is Restoring the Tallgrass Prairie by Shirley Shirley. We have purchased seed, and it's been really great seed, as from Hoxsey Native Seed in Linville, Iowa. This is they grow a lot of their own seed, and they have a really fun podcast. And Nicholas is a great resource at Hoxie to learn about native prairie and establishing prairie. Uh, Nicholas also sourced sedge seed for us and did a custom mix for us. And then I have purchased seed for Illinois, both from Hoxie, and Nicholas then worked with the Illinois NRCS to make sure that his mixes met the requirements for NRCS. But Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever also sell seed. And here's our contact information. And with that, we are ready, Vanya, for questions.
All right. Thank you, John and Nancy. That was great. Really appreciate that. All right. So if you have questions, you can type them into the chat at the bottom of your screen. And we did have some come in while you were presenting. This particular person kind of has 3 questions that kind of roll after each other, but can you both explain maybe some of the reasons that you have not enrolled more row crop acres?
Yeah, I think I can handle that. So we purchased, well, this is the Iowa farm. We purchased ground in 3 sections, I mean, in 3 transactions. So we had 20 acres first. We added another 20 acres of timber, and we put the first 20 acres, half of it we put into CRP when we first bought it. And then we planted the hardwood trees. The standing timber, we left alone, but then we just purchased another 15 acres of crop ground just last year. And Nancy, having not enough to do, decided to start a U-pick lavender farm. And so part of that is we've had the last 3 years lavender, but we've also added cut flowers. And then that piece of ground, we are working with providing crop ground for horticulture producers in the Cedar Rapids area mostly that can grow their own horticulture. So we stayed out of putting that back into the CRP. And we originally didn't re-up the CRP because we want to build a house out here someday, and we weren't quite sure where we wanted to site it. So we thought just getting completely out of the CRP was the thing to do.
And then for me, for the farm in Illinois, I am helping a beginning farmer get started as my custom operator. And honestly, that 80 acres that I originally bid in, 23 acres, and then adjusted it to 13, would have been ideal to bid the whole thing into CRP, especially I think my annual payment was $310 an acre, which was phenomenal for that quality of farm. And for the rest of the farm, I would love to put more into CRP, but I am trying to buy out my uncles and cousins who own 50% of some of the land. They want top dollar, and I have cash flow, done a lot of projected cash flows, looking at putting nearly all of the farm into conservation reserve, and I can't make the loan payment that based on the price that my uncle wants for the land. And so consequently, I haven't bid any more in, but once I can get through this farm acquisition and let the dust settle, I want to look at more land. I am concerned about taking land out of production for the beginning farmer that I'm helping. And so we have lots of conversations, and it'll be more conversations in the future.
Right. Do you think the steps that you've take in the conservation on your farm would work for those that are not retired and need to generate an annual cash flow?
I do. I don't know where the conservation reserve bids are at right now, and I know they vary by county, but I found that the if I didn't have to try to pay an exorbitant amount of money to buy out my uncle, the CRP bid was quite similar to cash rents, and with only then some annual maintenance the first years, and then property taxes. It would be a nice supplemental income, and it's very low risk compared to production agriculture.
Thank you, Nancy. One more from this individual. What do you believe maybe are some of the reasons that you did not use funding from NRCS and their CART tool, C-A-R-T tool, and would you self-fund?
I'm not familiar with CART tool. That's something I'm not familiar with. And on the farm in Illinois, these have been small areas, and I actually purchased more flower seeds for those CSP areas than what the funding allowed. And I was fine doing that because I love the diversity, and I wanted to get a good stand.
Thank you. And would you happen to know, I think you mentioned him as well, but I'm not recalling, if the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation assists with seeding?
I'm not familiar.
Mm.
So much of my experience has been in Illinois. I don't know if John might know.
No, I think when we made the decision not to go back into government programs, we kind of just didn't keep up on a lot of the funding sources here and decided to just self-finance and do things here on our own just because of our workload. Basically, we wanted to get things into less mowing more than anything here because just wanted to get out of that labor, and we also enjoy, and this ground was made for prairie. I mean, it wasn't made to farm, so it was a pretty easy decision for us to just go ahead and fund it ourselves and not look for financing through either NRCS or FSA.
Thank you, John. This person, I think, might have missed a little bit of your planning part of the prairie. So they're wanting to know if you worked with an organization like Tallgrass Prairie Center at the University of Northern Iowa, or maybe what resources you used on planning and establishing the prairie pollinator plots.
I forgot to add the Tallgrass Prairie Center at University of Northern Iowa as another resource, and it is an excellent one. They have a lot of great resources on their website for literature to download. I honestly haven't tuned into any of their webinars, and I have been wanting to attend. I think it's like a 2 or even 3 day prairie gathering, usually in late summer, but I've had a conflict and have not been able to participate. That is a different organization, but I think the Tallgrass Center works on that gathering. And then, of course, a couple of years ago, we had the director of the Tallgrass Center as the keynote speaker at the PFI annual conference, and that was it was so inspiring. Her presentation was so inspiring and so enlightening. Yes, I highly recommend that center as another resource for you.
Thank you. Well, we are at 1 o'clock, and I don't see any new questions. So if you have a last minute one, you can get it in there. Otherwise, I would like to thank you both, John and Nancy, for joining us today, and great presentation. Thank you so much for being here. And everyone else, have a good planting season.
Thank you.
All right, it's just us. Have you stopped the recording, Katie?